June 11th, 1955. At 3:59 p.m. in Le Mans, France, the air was vibrant with the hum of automobiles. The legendary race, known as 24 Hours of Le Mans, was less than a minute away from starting, and Jacques Grelley, a 19-year-old motorsport enthusiast, had snagged excellent seats. He and a friend were right at the front, next to the starting pit. The scent of gasoline filled the air. Today, Grelley would experience the furthest reaches of human endurance. The clock struck 4, the starting gun sounded, and 60 of history's most unholy engines launched into a race planned to last 24 hours. Tragically, for more than 80 spectators, it barely lasted 2. At 6:26 p.m., Grelley's friend, using a pair of binoculars, spotted a trio of racers approaching the pit. Mike Hawthorne was in the lead, being trailed closely by Lance Macklin in second and Pierre Levegh in third. Levegh had a lot to prove in this race. He'd nearly won Le Mans some years back, and now Mercedes had put him behind the wheel of the 300 SLR, a car representing the pinnacle of German engineering. That year, everyone would learn the name Pierre Levegh. He just needed to make sure he stayed close to Hawthorne and Macklin. Thousands of fans screamed in praise of the Daredevils as Hawthorne, Macklin, and Levegh flew into the pit at nearly 150 miles per hour. For decades, engineers and drivers had pushed the limits of speed and skill at Le Mans, and this was the moment they pushed too far. At that speed, Levegh had absolutely no chance to react as Macklin's vehicle swerved hard to the left, directly into Levegh. The 300 SLR, freakishly light in construction, soared over the grandstands. Jacques Grelley watched as Levegh's vehicle somersaulted directly towards him before he suddenly found himself on the ground. The faces in the crowd around him barely had time to morph from excitement to abject horror before the automobile ripped itself apart over their heads. Levegh was flung from the driver's seat and died instantly when his head impacted the pavement. The 300 SLR exploded and sprayed hundreds of spectators with flying metal. Anyone close to the blast was killed instantly. The hood of the car tore free, spiraled through the air, and cut into the crowded stands like a guillotine. It's recorded that at least 14 people were beheaded in the Le Mans disaster. The 300 SLR's monstrous engine, which had promised to carry Levegh to victory, was catapulted into the audience like a cannonball, killing dozens. Many who avoided the shrapnel instead caught fire as fluid from the engine began to combust. Even as crews rushed to put out the flames, not all of them could be extinguished. The magnesium body of the 300 SLR made it lighter, faster, but it also made it burn hotter than anyone was prepared to handle. When he finally rose to his feet, Jacques Grelley was greeted with a scene straight out of hell. I got up and could not see anything from my left eye. A piece of human brain covered the left lens of my glasses. I had a piece of scalp on my neck. When I saw blood on my hands, I began to go into shock. I looked and saw a headless corpse next to me, a binocular strap around its neck. Covered in blood, I started to walk away. The 1955 Le Mans disaster was the worst car accident in history, resulting in over 80 deaths and 120 serious injuries. It was a reminder that death doesn't ask us for permission, and it was hardly the last reminder racing had to offer. Just 2 years later, another race would end in tragedy, this time in Italy. The photo you're looking at now is popularly known as the Kiss of Death. It features Linda Christian kissing Alfonso de Portago in his final stop of the 1957 Miglia. Behind them, dozens of excited fans look on with joy. They don't know they're the last people who will ever see Alfonso de Portago in one piece. Shortly after the photo was taken, Portago returned to the track for the last time. At the 979th mile of the 1,000-mile race, while traveling at 155 miles per hour, the front left tire of Portago's Ferrari exploded. His car slammed into a curb, flew into the air, and crashed through a telephone pole. It stayed intact long enough to sail over the spectators closest to the road, before slamming back to earth, crushing families who thought their young children were a safe distance from the speeding cars. 9 spectators were killed by the careening automobile. mostly children, before the machine finally came to a rest in a nearby stream. Portago was later found, split in half near the destroyed vehicle. Following the accident, the photo of Portago's final kiss would, ironically, be published in Life magazine with the caption, "Death finally takes a man who courted it." A long list of dead drivers had already proven the dangers of racing, but it was understood to be dangerous for the racers, not the families who gathered to cheer them on. When I read stories like these, most of my sympathy is saved for the people who sat beside the track for hours, not knowing those hours were their last. In the fraction of a second before disaster struck, did they realize it was the end? That their time was up? What must that moment of hideous understanding feel like? What must it look like? The Italian painter, Walter Molino, dedicated his life as an artist to capturing that moment before death. His depiction of the 1957 Miglia tragedy, painted just 2 weeks after the race itself, vividly communicates the horrific chaos of the scene. The nearest observers leap out of the way of the Ferrari, while those who should have been safest are moments away from being crushed together beneath the weight of the falling car. Children tumble through the air or lie sprawled out across the ground, blasted away by the power of the vehicle as it explodes against the telephone pole. The entire scene is defined by an array of pained, panicked people, each one processing the actualized impossibility of the accident in their own way. One man is frozen in shock, while another pushes him towards safety, desperate to mitigate the damage. A woman stumbles away, looking back in sheer disbelief. This young girl is in agony, while the boy, flying upside down through the air, can express nothing but despair. Meanwhile, Portago is unable to maintain control of the wheel, his hands up in the air as he finds himself at the mercy of ruthless physical laws. Molino's work is brutal. While much of his work was done for La Domenica del Corriere, an Italian newspaper, I consider him to be a contender for one of the finest horror artists of his time. He always depicts the moments before death, never the aftermath. Even so, it's no less horrifying, as he always communicates enough to make the outcome obvious in your mind. His subjects reach desperately for anything that might save them from certain doom, but in the world of Molino's paintings, rescue is always out of reach. In the split second before death, the fear of the unknown takes a backseat to the horror of what is known. When the illusion of safety shatters and death is made real, it's the moment when "it could never happen to me" happens to you. Molino's best work is focused squarely on the unique emotions which only emerge alongside a deep understanding of one's own mortality. Molino rarely shows us fear. Fear is the horror of what might happen. It motivates us to improve ourselves or our situation. Fear is useful. Molino shows us despair, the horror of what is happening. Despair motivates no change, has no function, serves no purpose. Despair only hurts. Despair is the feeling of "it's too late." Here's one of Molino's most harrowing works. A father and son, moments away from being crushed to death by a rolling tractor. The look on the boy's face is absolutely haunting. He knows what's about to happen, but there's no stopping it now. Much of Molino's work showcases moments of absurd danger. Tigers moments away from consuming children, people being attacked by huge swarms of geese, or even a group of men armed with snakes robbing a store. His work almost bleeds into comedy, but the painting with the tractor certainly does not. For me, this one hits particularly close to home. Just about everyone from Appalachia has a story about a friend of a friend who was killed by farm equipment. Could be a tractor, a four-wheeler, something else. I grew up hearing about accidents like this one all the time, and this painting makes those stories a bit more real to me. It's so believable and mundane, and as such, it, among Molino's other paintings, hints at a horrifying reality. Perhaps death itself is equally mundane. following no law of narrative satisfaction. In the real world, death does not arrive at the end of the story. It always occurs somewhere in the middle. Once, when I was young, I was out riding horses with my mom. In the excitement, her horse, a young Palomino who had only recently been trained, began to buck and kick out her legs wildly. I watched my mom lose her balance as the horse thrashed, but that was fine. She'd fallen off horses before, and she fell on her head directly under the horse and went completely still. The Palomino's stomping hooves missed my mom's legs by inches. I screamed, tumbled from my saddle, and rushed to her side. I huddled over her and begged her to be okay, but she just wheezed, then stared blankly into the sky. I thought I was watching her die. She began to close her eyes, and I did the only thing I could think of. I slapped her hard across the face and screamed for her to wake up. Everything happened fast, and it's hard to remember all the details, but I think whatever I did worked. When my mom regained consciousness, she told me the last thing she remembered was driving to breakfast that morning. In her mind, she'd been driving her car until, without any warning, she was lying on her back in the middle of a field. She was okay, but that day, a seed of fear was planted in my mind. Years later, I think I was about 14 or so now, I was late to school on a rainy day, and as I rushed to the car, I slipped in the wet grass and slammed the back of my head onto the driveway. All I remembered was walking out my front door, then being halfway under my mom's car. About 5 seconds of my life had just been deleted. That short break in continuity mirrored the experience my mom described, only her concussion had cost her hours. I started to wonder, if I'd hit my head a little harder, would I have found myself under the car the moment I hopped out of bed? What if I'd lost days? Would a more serious accident strip away years? I worried that a future injury might rip me out of the present, and I'd wake up in the aftermath of a major car accident, or that I might blink and find myself in a hospital bed 20 years later. One mistake could easily change the course of my life, or end it altogether. I tried not to think about it. Most of modern life is dedicated to distraction, to convincing ourselves that death is something distant. In truth, death is an imminent reality, a close and constant possibility for us all. Some days, I feel like I can peaceably accept the inevitable, but the line between acceptance and ignorance is uncomfortably thin. I've accepted nothing if I only envision death upon a distant horizon. Sometimes what is inevitable arrives tomorrow, not 60 years from now. In my own pursuit of ignorance, I've always avoided the Final Destination movies since they play on my deeply held anxieties. I assumed that whatever shallow narrative they had only served to string one gory death to the next. Imagine my surprise when, at this point in writing the script, I actually sat down to watch the first one and discovered a thoughtful exploration of the very concepts I'm here to discuss. If you're unfamiliar with the series, each movie follows a group of characters who miraculously evade a deadly tragedy. Soon after, they begin to die in a series of freak accidents. Whereas most horror movies depict death hand in hand with monsters or murderers, Final Destination highlights the myriad dangers we interact with on a daily basis. Dangers which, most of the time, go entirely unnoticed because they're just so commonplace. Like, yeah, I could slip and fall into my bathtub if there was a leak. I might not end up getting strangled by this weird 90s clothesline thing, but cracking my skull open? That's a real possibility. The franchise's most memorable deaths are the ones that are mundane enough to make you paranoid. As over the top as some scenes may be, the small steps towards each accident are believable. A log might not go through your windshield and cause a 20-car pileup with explosions, but an unsecured brick can do plenty to the person in your passenger seat. That's not to mention the fact that sometimes very strange, Final Destination-esque strings of events do happen in the real world. One of the most famous examples comes from the late 80s in Buenos Aires, when a poodle flung itself from the 13th story balcony and landed squarely on top of 75-year-old Marta Espina on the sidewalk below, killing her instantly. Many quickly gathered to help or to simply gawk, and as the crowd swelled, it outgrew the sidewalk. Edith Sola, a woman at the edge of the crowd, was standing partway in the street when she was struck by something a little larger than a poodle, a city bus. The pair of deaths was shocking enough to trigger a heart attack in one witness, who promptly joined Marta and Edith in the hereafter. Gosh, maybe Molino's work wasn't so out there after all. 3 dead because a dog leapt without looking? That's the sort of morbid Rube Goldberg machine that Final Destination constantly presents that I'd rather write off as outlandish. There are no accidents in the world of Final Destination. A powerful intelligence guides each unfortunate sequence to its gory conclusion. But remove that intelligence and all the fear is still there. Death acts, but it does so as a force of nature, a law of the universe. That's why death appears throughout the film as a breeze. As we daily toe the line between life and death, even a gentle tug may drag us unexpectedly into oblivion. The horror of Final Destination is this. It isn't the high-speed racers who court death. It's ordinary people living ordinary lives. Death is unfaithful to daredevils, for death is not born out of danger. Death is born alongside life itself. For all the effort artists make to dissolve our impressions of immortality, there's nothing so convicting as reality. Often, the illusion of safety is only shattered in the final moments of someone's life, when some unrecognized danger announces itself and demands a response faster than anyone can supply. For some, however, the sense of invulnerability vanishes after simply witnessing death. Long ago, you had to be there, in the flesh, as someone else was separated from theirs. Perhaps that's why executions used to be a public affair. But with the popular adoption of the internet about 30 years ago, people could suddenly traumatize themselves on demand. Anyone who grew up online in the early 2000s has seen things they'll never unsee. Murder, abuse, torture. Gore ruled the early internet via shock sites like LiveLeak or Rotten. And while those websites may be gone today, the gore is not. Death is everywhere online. Anytime you see grainy footage from a dash cam factory or even a gym, it's probably a good call to click away. For a single day last February, Instagram Reels became possessed by the ghost of the year 2003 and exposed users to a flood of graphic content. For those who weren't used to that sort of thing, it was the first time that the veil was lifted to show a painful and unfamiliar side of reality. Murder in the streets, an accident on the job, butchery in a grimy dungeon. Overexposure to such traumatic videos, so shockingly and instinctively wrong, can rob you of any reasonable sense of safety. While some say that these videos help them to accept death, I suspect that's a coping mechanism. A mind in pain, struggling to identify any value or reason behind an awful and unnatural experience. We come from a very different society than our ancestors who had not yet caged away death as a thing for hospitals and funerals. Sure, mankind may once have witnessed violence regularly, and they may have appreciated life more because of it, but watching Funky Town on your iPhone is pretty different from watching the sheriff hang the man who shot your father in the back of the head. We're so deeply disconnected from the victims that the lie comes easily. It could never happen to me. The illusion of safety is most viscerally shattered for those who've had their own brush with death. It's not uncommon for people to avoid accidents by very narrow margins. Sometimes it's a matter of resilience. The accident isn't avoided, but it wasn't quite so serious as to kill anyone. Other times, the danger is most certainly powerful enough to kill, but it's dodged by a hair's breadth. More than 80 people died at Le Mans in 1955, but Jacques Grelley was not one of them. Whatever the reason, Grelley walked away from Le Mans unscathed, when many could not, and that's a heavy thing to bear. Jacques Grelley attended Le Mans to see the limits of human endurance, and in the end, it was his own endurance that was tested. He left the track that day with a choice we all make every single day, whether we realize it or not. Death is real. Do I thus lay down to die, or shall I endure? Near the beginning of the video, I read you a portion of Grelley's short account of the Le Mans disaster, but I left off the final and most important line because it is by far the most shocking thing I read in research for this video, and I'd like to read it for you now. It was a close call, but it was not time for me. I returned to the circuit 4 years later to drive in the 24 hours of Le Mans. Until you've cheated death, you'll never know for certain that you're playing his game. Once you know, however, it can be paralyzing. Many struggle to live a normal life after something so traumatic, but Jacques Grelley did not stop living simply because he had almost died. When Grelley returned to Le Mans in 1959, he finished in 9th position. But the Le Mans was always a competition of human endurance, not speed, and I would be surprised if any other racer showed as much endurance as Grelley that day. Often, he who shouldn't be alive lives most. At the start of high school, I was so worried about losing my memories or getting into an accident that all I could do was lurk in the relative safety of my room. The way I saw it, one accident could cost me days or even years. For the me I'd be after the accident, that lost time would be little more than a dream, forgotten upon waking. I recognized that there was something irrational about my fear, but my young mind struggled to identify the lapse in logic. Then, after weeks of agonizing over this issue as often as I failed to distract myself from it, I came to a conclusion. Nothing can be lost unless it is first gained. I have no guarantee that I can evade a major accident in my lifetime. I probably can't, and I may not remember everything on the other side. One day, I may forget, but not until I have first remembered. One day I will die, but not until I have first lived. Death is a reminder that our short stay on Earth is shorter still when poorly spent. True acceptance inspires neither anxiety nor apathy, but a joyful urgency to spend each day well, for each day may very well be your last. So, what does it mean to spend each day well? What does it mean to live? I'd be lying if I told you I believed everyone should find their own way. To be 1000% real with you right now, I believe life is only found in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who commanded us, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself. I often fail to follow his commandments, but Christ died so that struggling people could come to him anytime, anywhere. I didn't make this video to argue my own beliefs. You don't have to agree with me about anything, but I am suggesting that it's better to be aware of death than to ignore it. Really, this whole video is a long-winded elaboration upon a bit of ancient wisdom. Memento mori. Remember death. Don't float past existence on wings of distraction. Face eternity with your head up and your eyes forward. Live consciously, seek joy, and cherish every breath, because each one is a gift of unimaginable value. I'm Curmudgeon,